Today, you are here for the Financial Aid Petitions presentation. So sometimes the information our office receives does not always represent the most current and accurate information on students. We have 3 petitions available to allow students to provide the most accurate information based on their unique circumstances. Today, we will review those petitions and the necessary steps to complete them. First, we will start with the Financial Aid Revision Petition. Then we'll discuss the Budget Increase Petition, followed by the Dependency Override Petition, which is specifically for undergraduate students. And then we'll wrap it up by just going over the steps to complete the petition. We do have other petitions that focus on issues like satisfactory academic progress and state and institutional scholarships. If you need assistance with those petitions, please contact our one-stop. I will provide that contact information at the end of this presentation. If you have questions that aren't answered during the presentation, we will have a Q&A section at the end. So before we begin our first topic on financial aid revision petitions, I want to go over the FAFSA. The FAFSA, or the Federal Application for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, is an annual application for federal and some state and institutional financial aid. The FAFSA captures household and financial information for you and your parent if you're a dependent student, or just for you if you're an independent student. The end result of completing the FAFSA is you will receive an expected family contribution, or EFC number. Your EFC is an index number that college financial aid staff use to determine how much financial aid you would receive if you were to attend their college. This information you report on your FAFSA form is used to calculate your EFC. Most of the financial aid information required comes from completed tax return information from 2 years ago. A lot can happen with students and parents' finances between now and then. According to the Pew Research Center, more than 4 in 10 US adults say they or someone in their household has lost a job or wages since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak. Now, since your EFC determines how much a student will receive in most forms of financial aid, the lower an EFC, the more eligibility a student has for need-based financial aid. So who is eligible to complete a FAFSA? Just some basic eligibility requirements include being a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen, having a valid Social Security number, with the exception of students who are from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, or the Republic of Palau. Those are just some basic eligibility requirements. If you have some questions and you want to find out a little bit more about those FAFSA eligibility requirements, then please go to studentaid.gov/understand-aid/eligibility/requirements. So what happens if your FAFSA doesn't reflect your current circumstances? This is when you would complete the financial aid revision petition. The financial aid revision petition allows our office to review extenuating circumstances that impact the student's household and finances that are not reflected on the FAFSA. The hope of completing the financial aid revision petition is to see if we can reduce the student's EFC based on the submitted information that you provide us. A lower EFC may result in an increased eligibility for need-based financial aid. And when I say need-based financial aid, I mean aid like the federal Pell Grant or federal direct subsidized loans. One thing to keep in mind is that having an approved financial aid revision petition may result in that eligibility for need-based aid, but it does not result in additional scholarships or an updated cost of attendance. So what are some circumstances that we consider? Some change in circumstances would include loss of employment, loss or change in the amount of child support, Social Security, or other benefits, divorce or separation of parents or spouse if you're an independent student, death of a parent or spouse, unusual medical expenses that are not covered by your insurance, one-time taxable income like IRAs, pension distributions, or back year Social Security payments, parents attending college. Yes, we can review your FAFSA, we can review your financial aid revision petition if you have a parent that is attending college and is in a degree seeking program. If the student's parent has retired, or if you're a dependent student and you recently got married, we could even review this petition for that reason. If your circumstances do not fall within one of these categories, please check with an advisor from our office. So now let's review some circumstances that are not considered. We have standard of living expenses, mortgage payments, car payments, credit card or other personal debts, vacation expenses, or all other discretionary expenses. So you've completed the financial aid revision petition. So what are the next steps? So here's the process. You want to first make sure that you have a completed FAFSA. For all of our petitions that we're reviewing today, you want to make sure that you have a completed FAFSA. If you do not have a FAFSA completed, we cannot take a second review at your information to see if we can make any adjustments. So you'll have the completed FAFSA, then the petition form. Make sure you include your supporting documentation and a detailed written explanation. All required documents must be submitted for the review process. Once you have those documents, you'll go ahead and submit that packet to our office, and then we'll begin our reviewing of your forms. Any decisions that are made, you will get an email sent to your UF email address with a request for either additional information or with the petition decision. It does take approximately 2 weeks for review, so it's very important that whenever you submit your petition that you try to include as much information as possible. Some of the supporting documentation that we can take, and these are just examples of some of the supporting documentation that we have for certain extenuating circumstances, would include, let's take, for instance, you have a loss or change in employment. We would want to collect your 2020 tax return or tax transcripts with W-2s and schedules 1, 2, and 3, or most recent paycheck stubs and unemployment benefits. So if you had a loss or change in employment, and let's just say you lost your job last year, your 2020 taxes would probably reflect what your most current situation is. But if it doesn't, then you would end up giving us whatever other additional documentation you believe would represent your situation best. If you had a divorce or separation, we would ask for the divorce agreement, along with both parties' 2019 tax returns or transcripts, along with the W-2s and schedules 1, 2, and 3. Now, you may notice that there's a difference between the tax years required for the loss or change in employment versus the divorce or separation. The reason why the divorce or separation is asking for the 2019 taxes is because what we're doing is, since there was a separation, somebody's leaving the household, we want to make sure that we're capturing the financial income for the remaining person that is in the household. Then you have death of parent or spouse. We would require the death certificate along with the 2019 tax return or transcripts with W-2s and the schedules 1, 2, and 3. Again, just like the divorce or separation, we want to be able to exclude the person that's left. So we want to make sure that we are accurately reflecting the income for the person that is left in the household. And then some examples, if you or your parent experienced a one-time taxable income, we would ask for the 2019 tax returns or transcripts showing that one-time payment, documentation to identify the source of income, along with a personal statement of how the money was spent. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list of the supporting documentation that we accept. When you review the financial aid revision petition, there are a list of the extenuating circumstances, along with some examples of the supporting documentation that we would potentially be looking for. So what's the outcome? You submitted your petition, now you're waiting for that decision. There are 3 decisions that can be made once your petition is reviewed. The first one is the approval. If you get an approved petition, your FAFSA information is updated, your expected family contribution is usually decreased, and this may result in eligibility for need-based financial aid. If your petition is denied with a request for additional information, then you'll submit the additional information that was requested. Once you resubmit that petition, the review process starts all over. And then if anything else is needed, you'll be notified through your UF email. And then you have the denial. If you receive a denial decision, then your FAFSA information remains unchanged. The petition decision is final. And if, let's just say you got that denial, you have a new circumstance that occurs, you can always resubmit a petition and we will review it. Now let's move on to the budget increase petition. But before we start that, let's first quickly go over cost of attendance. So the cost of attendance, your cost of attendance, is made up of 8 components that we use to determine your budget, your student budget. We have items like tuition and fees, books and supplies, technology, housing, food, transportation, clothing maintenance, and then personal. Each year, these expenses are reevaluated to reflect the most current costs a student may experience. Something important to remember about the cost of attendance is that it is assigned, there's an assigned amount that is given for each semester. We reevaluate your budget after the drop add period. The cost of attendance actually determines the maximum amount of financial aid that a student can potentially receive. So what can you do when your actual expenses exceed your estimated cost of attendance? This is when you would complete the budget increase petition. The budget increase petition reviews special circumstances that result in a student's actual educational expenses to exceed their estimated cost of attendance. Due to special circumstances, some students will experience higher expenses in their cost of attendance components than others. The budget increase petition allows our office to consider those expenses with the hope of increasing a corresponding cost of attendance component. An increased cost of attendance may result in more room in your student budget for additional aid. However, the petition itself does not add additional aid to your student financial aid file. Students with an approved petition often request additional loan funds or increased work study limits. Remember, receiving an approved budget petition does not guarantee awarding of additional need-based grants or scholarships. So what are some special circumstances that we consider? We can consider reviewing your budget increase petition if you have tuitions or fees that are in excess of the amount allotted in your standard cost of attendance, books and supplies in excess of your standard cost of attendance. You may have a required field trip that you need in order to complete your degree. We can take a look at that. Transportation costs for commuting students. Something to remember if you're a commuting student is that we're looking at students that actually have to commute to Gainesville to attend their classes. So if you live in Jacksonville or Ocala, we can review the cost that you have for transportation. childcare expenses, or your UF health insurance charges. Remember, expenses must be related to a cost of attendance component in order for us to review your petition. So some circumstances that we do not consider. We have late fees, credit card payments, car purchase or lease and payments, car insurance, personal or family trips, expenses that do not fall within a cost of attendance component. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just some examples of circumstances that we do not consider. So what is the process to complete the petition? You want to have, as I said, that completed FAFSA, your completed petition form, and supporting documentation. Once you have those three components, you'll go ahead and submit your packet for our office to review. And then any decisions that are made, you will be notified through your UF email. Remember that budget adjustments cannot be made until after the drop add period. You must submit all required documents in order for the review process to begin. It does take approximately 2 weeks for us to review your petition. If you are considering completing the budget increase petition for the 2021-2022 school year, those petitions will be available at the end of July. So, some examples of the supporting documentation needed in order for us to justify the potential increase in your cost of attendance. Let's take, for instance, paid receipts. So, paid receipts would be something that you would give us if you had, let's say, books and supplies. You ended up having to pay more in books and supplies. Definitely give us your paid receipts. We'll go ahead and we'll review to see if the actual cost that you spent on your books and supplies exceeds your estimated cost of attendance budget. So paid receipts need to be related to the cost of attendance item, and it should exceed it. Let's say you have a class trip that you have to take, a required class trip. You want to provide us a department letter verifying the class trip. This trip must be required for your course, and the letter should include any costs associated with the trip. Let's say you have increased housing payments. You can provide us your current lease agreement, or if you have a mortgage, your mortgage statement. If you're commuting back and forth between, let's say, Jacksonville and Gainesville, and you want us to review your transportation costs, then you'll provide us mileage and gas receipts. Make sure to include any weekly travel costs that you may have, along with the frequency of you commuting from outside of Gainesville. And then include the nature of the travel. So for instance, as I said, if you're commuting back and forth from Jacksonville to Gainesville, and you're attending class on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you would just say, hey, I'm traveling from Jacksonville to Gainesville, round trip 3 times a week, and this is how much I spend. Remember that any expenses that you incur must happen during the enrollment period. So if you are petitioning for the fall semester, you want to make sure that those expenses all happen during the fall semester. So what's the outcome? Once again, we have those 3 decisions: your approval, the denial with request for additional information, or just the standard denial. If you're approved, your corresponding cost of attendance component is updated, and then you may be eligible for additional financial aid as a result of the increased student budget. If you receive an email with a denial for a request for additional information, make sure to review the information that's being requested, and then you will submit that by responding to that email, or by responding to the link in the email. Submission of the requested information may result in an approval or denial. If you're denied, then your cost of attendance remains unchanged. The petition decision is final. If you do have a new circumstance that you would like for us to consider, you can always submit a new budget increase petition. Just one more thing to consider. As I said, if you are approved, your cost of attendance component is updated, so you'll have that increased budget. Sometimes students are able to take out additional student loans or work study funds. But if you have already exhausted all of those funds available to you, then you may seek out a private educational loan. Now let's discuss the dependency override petition, which I said was for undergraduate students. Now, if you're an undergraduate student, you could be considered a dependent student. So let's just quickly go over dependent versus independent. A dependent student, in order to be considered an independent student, you must meet certain independent requirements, criteria. So whenever you're completing the FAFSA, there are 10 questions that you'll answer either yes or no to if it's a criteria that you meet. So those 10 questions will help the Department of Education determine whether or not you should be considered an independent student. So those questions include, will you be 24 years of age for that school year? Are you married or separated but not divorced? Will you be working towards a master's or doctorate degree? Do you have children who receive more than half of the support from you? Do you have dependents other than children or a spouse that receive more than half of their support from you? Are you currently serving active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Or are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned age 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a ward or dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor, or are you in a legal guardianship as determined by court? Are you an unaccompanied youth who is homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? These 10 questions, if you answer yes to any one of them, you would be considered an independent student. Dependent students are required to include parent information on their FAFSA. If you're independent, then you wouldn't be required to include your parents' information. And also too, another difference between dependent and independent students is that if you are independent, your financial aid availability on some awards can differ between. So for instance, like student loans, you may end up getting increased limits for student loans if you are an independent student versus a dependent student. So what do you do if you can't obtain your parents' information? This is when you would complete the dependency override petition. Due to special circumstances, some dependent students may be considered an independent student without answering yes to one of the dependency questions on the FAFSA. The dependency override petition allows our office to consider reevaluating a student's dependency status. So unusual and exceptional circumstances that a student has experienced, which may cause them to be considered independent rather dependent, are just some of the circumstances or the criteria of the circumstances that we would review. Moving from a dependent to an independent student may result in excluding parent information on the FAFSA, which less income can mean increased eligibility for financial aid. It could even increase your loan limits, as I briefly mentioned before. Amounts do differ between dependent and independent students. So if you do get an approved dependency override petition, this will allow the parent information to be omitted from the FAFSA, and you may end up being eligible for additional financial aid eligibility. So what are some examples of unusual and exceptional circumstances? We have documented abandonment, parental drug use, parental incapacity, physical or emotional abuse, severe estrangement from parents, or parental incarceration. Some circumstances that we do not consider include your parent refusing to provide information on the FAFSA or for verification process. Parents do not claim the student as a dependent on their income taxes. Parents are unwilling or unable to contribute to the student's education. Students demonstrate self-sufficiency. The student is reluctant to request information from their parent, or the student does not wish to communicate with their parent. Something to keep in mind with the dependency override petition is that we're looking to see, does the student have a special or unusual circumstance that maybe we can consider them for the dependency override? So what you're looking for is, let's just say, for instance, you do not communicate with your parents, but it's because you and your parents they have decided that they don't want to have anything with you. They don't want to, they're not providing for you, or you have a very difficult situation that you may be experiencing with them to where it's an endangerment for you to be speaking to them. Then this is a reason why you may want to consider the dependency override petition. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list. So if you have some questions, contact our office and speak to one of our financial aid advisors, and they'll go over and see if it's something that maybe you should complete the dependency override petition for. So what's the process? You want to have the completed FAFSA. You want to complete your petition form and include any supporting documentation, third-party statements, and a detailed written explanation. Again, all required documents must be submitted for the review process. Once you submit your packet, a team member will review your petition, and then any decisions that are made, you will be notified through your UF email, and it would be either for a request for additional information and the petition decision. The review process for the petition does take approximately 2 weeks. And then if you are approved, if your dependency override petition is approved, you will be required to confirm your circumstances every year that you are still in your undergraduate program. So let's briefly discuss the third-party statements. With third-party statements, which the dependency override petition is the only petition where you would need to include letters from others that are involved with your circumstances. So with third-party statements, you would want to make sure that you have 2 or more letters, and that the third-party adults that you have that write those letters for you are knowledgeable about your situation and can verify your circumstances. So you would want to have at least 1 letter from a third-party professional. So like a guidance counselor, physician, social worker, licensed therapist, clergy, or other professional. In your letter, you want to make sure that the details that are included is how that person knows you, how long they've known you, and their involvement with your situation. Third-party letters cannot be from somebody who is related to you or resides at your address. And then they want to make sure that they include their contact information, so like a telephone number or an address. So supporting documentation. And again, this is just some examples. It's not an exhaustive list of the supporting documentation required. So if let's say you're on the verge of potentially maybe being homeless, or you're at risk of being homeless, you would want to give us some information about your situation, or just with any of those situations. You want to just give us details regarding your living situation. You can provide us a current lease agreement or a signed statement explaining your living situation. Biggest thing to remember is just you want to be as detailed as possible. You want to make sure that whatever that supporting documentation it is that you're giving us helps paint the picture of what your situation is and what you're going through. So additional documentation supporting your petition, you just give us whatever it is that you can, and we'll review it. And of course, if there's something else that's needed or clarification of what you've given us, you will be notified. So what's the outcome? Again, you can have an approval, a denial with additional information, a request for additional information, or a denial. If you're approved, then your dependency status changes to independent. As I said before, approved students will need to reconfirm their circumstances for the following academic years. So basically until you graduate from your undergraduate program. Your parent information is no longer required on the FAFSA, and you may be eligible for additional financial aid. If you're denied, but with a request for additional information, just review the email that you received, provide whatever the requested documentation is, you'll submit it, and once you submit it, we'll go back through that review process, and it could potentially result in a denial or approval. If you're denied, then your dependency status remains dependent until you've met the independent qualifications. The petition decision is final, and your parent information is required on the FAFSA. Again, if you have any new circumstances, you can always submit a new dependency override petition. So now that we've reviewed the 3 petitions that we have here in our office, let's go over how to complete them. So you will go to our SFA website form. So that would be sfa.ufl.edu/forms. And you would select the petition that meets your circumstances. The form is an electronic form. So once you select that petition, so for instance, if you wanted to complete the financial aid revision petition, you would go ahead and click that link, and then you'll be redirected to the electronic form. The electronic form that you'll encounter is our ProEd Solutions document. You're going to want to enter your full first and last name, include your UF email address, and then click on Begin Signing. An email will be sent to your UF email account. Click Review the document to be routed to the petition. Petitions must be completed by the student. If you assign the petition to be completed by another individual, our office will not be able to process it, and you will have to restart the process. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and you read the electronic record and signature disclosure. You'll select I agree to use the electronic records and signatures. You'll click Continue, but do not assign someone else from the other actions. Once you get to the petition form, which we're going to use the financial aid revision petition as our example, you're going to want to enter the correct UFID number, your correct UFID number. You're going to select the circumstance that is applicable to your situation. So let's choose the loss or change in employment. Note that we have the documentation required, which here you have you and your parents' 2020 tax return or transcripts. If your parents had a recent change or loss in employment, the 2020 tax return or transcripts, and it's not reflected on your 2020 tax return or transcripts, then upload the most recent paycheck stubs. You'll have your little attachment link. You'll click on that. You'll upload whatever supporting documentation you have, and then you'll select Done. When you get to the detailed personal statement section, please provide a detailed explanation of your circumstances. Details you would want to include would be dates, the impact of your situation, just anything that you think is relevant that we need to know. You're going to electronically sign it, and then you'll select Finish. Once you select Finish, that petition will be directed to our office. So we just reviewed the 3 petitions that our office reviews to see if we can make any adjustments to reflect what your current situations are. So let's just sum these up real quick. So we have the Financial Aid Revision Petition, the Budget Increase Petition, and the Dependency Override Petition if you're an undergraduate student. If you're completing the Financial Aid Revision Petition, that means that you have an extenuating circumstance that impacts your student's household or finances that are not reflected on the FAFSA. Some situations to consider would be loss of employment, loss or change in the amount of child support, Social Security, or other benefits, divorce or separation of parents or spouse, death of parents or spouse, unusual medical expenses that are not covered by your insurance and that you paid, one-time taxable income, your parents are attending college in a degree-seeking program, student's parent has retired, or you, the student, have had a change in your marital status and you are classified as a dependent student, so now you want to be reclassified as an independent student. Required documents include having a completed FAFSA, completing your petition form. You'll provide whatever supporting documentation you have that supports your circumstance, and a written explanation. If you are approved for the Financial Aid Revision Petition, your FAFSA information is updated and your expected family contribution usually decreases. This may result in eligibility for need-based financial aid. If you are completing the Budget Increase Petition, you are completing it because you have a special circumstance that resulted in your actual educational expenses exceeding your estimated cost of attendance. Some situations that are considered include the tuition and fees in excess of the amount of allotted standard cost of attendance, your book and supplies in excess of the standard cost of attendance, required field trips, transportation costs for commuting students, childcare expenses, or UF health insurance charges. You are required to have a completed FAFSA, complete the petition form, and provide whatever supporting documentation you have that shows your paid receipts. If approved, your corresponding cost of attendance component is updated, and you may be eligible for additional financial aid as a result of the increased student budget. Then finally, you have the Dependency Override Petition for undergraduate students. This usually involves unusual or exceptional circumstances that a student has experienced which may cause them to be considered an independent student. Situations that are considered include documented abandonment, parental drug use, parental incapacity, physical or emotional abuse, severe estrangement from parents, or parental incarceration. You are going to want to make sure that you have a completed FAFSA for your required documents, the petition form, any third-party statements, along with your supporting documentation and your written explanation. If you are approved for your dependency override petition, then your dependency status changes to independent. The parent information will no longer be required on the FAFSA, and you may be eligible for additional financial aid. Just remember that if you need assistance with anything financial aid, registration, fees, payments, or admission requirements, please contact our onestop.em.ufl.edu/connect, and one of our team members would be happy to assist you.